Imagine a city bathed in sunlight, marble temples like the Parthenon gleaming atop the Acropolis. Down below, the agora buzzes with life. Merchants hawk their wares, artisans craft masterpieces, and in the shaded porticos, minds like Socrates and Plato challenge the very nature of existence. This was Athens at its zenith, a beacon of philosophy, democracy, and art, the heart of a golden age. But this brilliance was forged in the fires of conflict and guarded by a formidable power. The Athenian navy, a fleet of sleek bronze-rammed triremes, ruled the Aegean Sea. They were the backbone of the Delian League, an alliance formed to protect against Persia, but which slowly transformed into an Athenian empire. Wealth from allied city-states poured into Athens, funding not just magnificent temples, but also the legendary Longwall's massive fortifications connecting the city to its port, making it virtually impregnable by land. Athens was a fortress, an island on the mainland, secure in its naval supremacy. At the heart of Athens was a radical idea: democracy. Every male citizen had a voice, the right to vote directly on laws and policies. We can picture them, gathered on the Nix Hill, raising their hands to decide the fate of their city. Yet, this ideal of freedom at home stood in stark contrast to its actions abroad. Athenian fleets would sail to so-called allied cities, demanding tribute and enforcing loyalty. The democracy that championed liberty for its own citizens often denied it to others. The Athenian assembly, which celebrated freedom, also voted to dominate and subjugate its neighbors. Was it a liberator or a tyrant? The line grew blurrier with each passing year. Sao, across the rugged hills of the Peloponnese, another power watched with growing suspicion. Sparta. This was a city forged in discipline and steel. From birth, Spartan boys were trained for one purpose: to become the perfect soldier. Their society was rigid, conservative, and land-based, a stark opposite to the freewheeling maritime Athenians. The Spartans and their Peloponnesian League saw Athens' expanding influence not as a golden age, but as a direct threat. They feared the democratic idea spreading, they feared the naval power that could choke their trade, and they feared a future dominated by their arrogant rival. The air grew thick with tension. Diplomatic missions failed, with ambassadors trading veiled threats and accusations. In the countryside of Attica, farmers would gaze nervously at the horizon, wondering when Spartan shields might appear over the hills. In the cities, young men who had only known peace began to sharpen their spears and oil their armor, preparing for a conflict their fathers had only spoken of in whispers. Two competing systems, two irreconcilable ambitions, were set on a collision course. The peace that had nurtured a golden age was fracturing under the weight of fear and pride. The speeches were over. The final ultimatums were delivered and rejected. An entire generation of Greeks, who saw themselves as brothers united against Persia, were now poised to turn on each other. The war that was coming would not be a short, glorious affair. It would be a brutal, decades-long struggle that would consume the Greek world. Pitting city against city, neighbor against neighbor, it would shatter alliances, drain treasuries, and ultimately bring an end to the very glory that Athens had worked so hard to build. The Golden Age was about to be drowned in a sea of blood. When war finally came, it did not begin with a dramatic clash of armies. It began with fear. In the spring of 431 BCE, Spartan forces crossed into Attica, the farmland surrounding Athens. Their strategy was ancient and brutally simple: burn the fields, destroy the villages, and force the enemy to fight on open ground. Athens refused. Pericles, the most powerful man in the city, had a plan, one that demanded patience, discipline, and faith in walls and wood instead of swords. He ordered the population of the countryside to abandon their homes and retreat behind Athens' long walls. Farms were left to burn. Temples outside the city were stripped. Generations of land ownership vanished in days. For rural Athenians, this was not strategy, it was trauma. Families crowded into a city never meant to hold them all. Tents filled temples. Streets overflowed with refugees, livestock, and resentment. The rich endured inconvenience. The poor endured ruin. Yet Pericles stood firm. Athens would not fight Sparta where Sparta was strongest. Instead, the city would rely on its navy, raiding the Peloponnese, controlling trade, and waiting for Sparta to tire of a war it could not afford to sustain. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it demanded time, and time became the enemy. Spartan armies returned year after year, burning the land again and again. Farmers watched their livelihoods vanish from behind stone walls. They were forbidden to leave. Anger grew. Faith in leadership eroded. Democracy, once confident in its peace, faltered when faced with limits. Then something worse happened. In the second year of the war, sickness crept into Athens through the crowded port of Piraeus. No one knew where it came from. No one knew how to stop it. The plague tore through the city with terrifying speed, fever, vomiting, blindness, madness. Dead bodies filled the streets. Funeral rites collapsed. Law and order dissolved. Even Pericles fell ill. When he died in 429 BCE, Athens lost more than a leader. It lost a one-man capable of holding the city together under prolonged suffering. The careful balance between democracy and discipline collapsed with him. What followed was not unity, but division. Athens would continue the war, but it would no longer fight it wisely. And the people trapped inside those walls were about to learn that strategy cannot protect a city from itself. The plague did more than kill people, it killed belief. Thucydides, an Athenian general who survived the sickness himself, described a city unrecognizable to those who had once praised it. The sick were abandoned, the dead were stacked. Sacred laws were ignored because survival demanded speed, not tradition. Athens, the proud teacher of Greece, unraveled. With death everywhere, people stopped planning for the future. Wealth was spent recklessly, morality lost meaning. If tomorrow was uncertain, why obey today's rules? Democracy, already strained, became volatile. New leaders rose, men skilled not in patience, but in persuasion. They promised victory instead of enduring, revenge instead of restraint. Among them was Cleon, loud, aggressive, and popular, a man who spoke the language of anger. The war shifted. Instead of cautious containment, Athens began chasing dominance. Neutral cities were pressured, revolts were punished harshly. The famous case of Mytilene revealed how close Athens came to mass execution, voting one day to kill an entire city, only to reverse the decision the next. Even mercy had to race against time. Meanwhile, the war spread beyond Attica. Fighting erupted in distant theaters, Thrace, Boeotia, the seas. Greek fought Greek everywhere, often with no clear gain. Victory became local, losses became permanent. Sparta, though less flexible, endured. And then came a pause. In 421 BCE, exhausted and bloodied, both sides agreed to the Peace of Nicias. It promised stability, it delivered illusion. Neither side trusted the terms. Neither side truly stopped preparing for war. Athens had survived the plague, but it had not healed. Its confidence returned, distorted, dangerous, and hungry for proof that the suffering had meant something. That hunger would soon pull Athens into the greatest mistake of the war. The Peloponnesian War did not only destroy cities, it destroyed trust. As the conflict dragged on, Greek communities turned inward. Allies fractured. Neutrals were forced to choose sides. And within cities themselves, politics hardened into factions. Democracy versus oligarchy, loyalty versus survival. The most horrifying example came on the island of Corfu. There, civil war erupted as citizens slaughtered one another under the banners of Athens and Sparta. Revenge replaced justice. Words lost meaning. Loyalty became a death sentence. Thucydides saw this as a warning. War, he wrote, strips away restraint. It teaches men to justify cruelty, to twist language, to believe that survival excuses everything. What happened on Corcyra was not unique, it was the future. Athens was not immune. Political conspiracies grew. Generals were recalled, tried, executed. Success brought suspicion. Failure brought death. Decision-making slowed, then swung wildly, driven by fear of blame rather than clarity of purpose. Into this chaos stepped a man who embodied the war's moral collapse. Alcibiades, brilliant, charismatic, reckless. Alcibiades promised greatness. He spoke of glory, expansion, and destiny. He mocked restraint and called hesitation cowardice, and the city listened. Because Athens needed to believe it was still exceptional, and Alcibiades offered a war that would prove it. Imagine standing at the pinnacle of power, wealth, and culture. A city that seemed untouchable, a beacon of democracy and philosophy. This was Athens in the 5th century BC, the jewel of the ancient world. Yet, in just a few short years, this mighty empire would be brought to its knees, not by an external force alone, but by a decision born of its own ambition and pride. This is the story of the Sicilian Expedition, a military catastrophe so profound it sealed the fate of Athens and changed the course of Western history. How did it all go so wrong? The year is 415 BC. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta has been raging for years. With a fragile peace barely holding, Athens, ever ambitious, saw an opportunity far to the west, on the island of Sicily. The city of Segesta had asked for their help against its rival, Syracuse, a powerful city with ties to Sparta's allies. For some in Athens, like the charismatic but controversial General Alcibiades, this was a chance for unparalleled glory and wealth. He painted a picture of a swift victory, of Sicily's riches flowing back to Athens, and of an empire that would stretch across the Mediterranean. The lure was irresistible. Against the warnings of more cautious leaders like Nicias, who argued the risks were too great, the Athenian assembly voted for war. The scale of the undertaking was breathtaking. Over 100 triremes, the most advanced warships of their time, were prepared. Thousands of heavily armed hoplites and skilled rowers were assembled. It was the largest and most expensive overseas force ever dispatched by a Greek city. As the grand fleet set sail from the port of Piraeus, the mood was one of triumphant optimism. Citizens lined the shores, pouring libations and singing hymns, convinced they were witnessing the dawn of an even greater Athenian age. The soldiers were full of hope, dreaming of the conquests to come. But among the cheering crowds, some older citizens, who remembered the true cost of war, watched with worried faces, a sense of foreboding hanging in the air. Upon arriving in Sicily, the Athenian command was immediately fractured. The three generals Alcibiades, Nicias, and Lamachus had conflicting strategies. Before they could even agree on a plan, disaster struck. A ship arrived from Athens with stunning news. Alcibiades was to be recalled to stand trial on charges of sacrilege. His political enemies had moved against him in his absence. Facing a likely death sentence, Alcibiades made a fateful choice. Instead of returning to Athens, he defected. He fled to Sparta, Athens' mortal enemy. This was a catastrophic turning point. Alcibiades, the brilliant mind who had conceived the expedition, was now advising the Spartans on how to defeat it. He revealed Athens' entire strategy, their weaknesses, and their goals. He urged Sparta to send a top general and reinforcements to aid Syracuse, and more crucially, to occupy a permanent fort in Athenian territory back home, a move that would bleed Athens' resources year-round. Back in Sicily, the Athenian forces were left in confusion. The cautious Nicias, who had opposed the expedition from the start, was now in sole command. His leadership became hesitant and indecisive. The initial momentum was lost, giving Syracuse precious time to prepare its defenses and rally its allies. The great Athenian gamble was already beginning to unravel. Despite the initial setbacks, the Athenian army was still a formidable force. They managed to lay siege to Syracuse, building a massive wall to cut the city off from land. For a moment, it seemed they might still succeed, but then, acting on Alcibiades' advice, Sparta sent their best, General Gylippus, to Sicily. His arrival revitalized the Syracusan defenders. He broke through the Athenian siege lines and began building a counterwall preventing the complete encirclement of the city. The tide had turned decisively. The Athenian besiegers soon became the besieged. Their fleet, once masters of the sea, found itself trapped in the great harbor of Syracuse. The Syracusans, growing in confidence, devised new tactics to counter the Athenian ships. Disease began to spread through the Athenian camp, which was now a cramped and unsanitary swamp. Nicias, sick himself and paralyzed by superstition, delayed a potential retreat because of a lunar eclipse, seeing it as a terrible omen. This delay sealed their fate. In a final, desperate naval battle inside the harbor, the Athenian fleet was utterly annihilated. The screams of the dying echoed across the water as the Athenians on shore watched in horror, their last hope for escape destroyed. What followed was one of the most brutal episodes in ancient warfare. Trapped, starving, and defeated, the surviving 40,000 Athenian soldiers and their allies attempted a desperate march overland, hoping to reach a friendly city. But they were relentlessly hunted down by the Syracusan cavalry. Exhausted and demoralized, thousands were cut down or surrendered. The captured were subjected to a horrific fate. The generals Nicias and Demosthenes were executed. Thousands of ordinary soldiers were thrown into the deep open-air stone quarries of Syracuse, exposed to the scorching sun by day and the cold by night, with minimal food and water. They died in droves from starvation, disease, and exposure. For 70 days, they suffered in this living hell. The few who survived were sold into slavery, their foreheads branded with the mark of a horse. The grandest army Athens had ever sent forth was simply gone. News of the disaster trickled back to Athens, but at first, no one could believe it. It seemed impossible. When the full truth was confirmed, the city was plunged into a state of panic and grief. Nearly every family had lost a son, a brother, or a husband. The financial cost was crippling, and the loss of so many skilled rowers and soldiers was irreplaceable. Athens' enemies, smelling blood, closed in. Allies began to revolt. Sparta, with funding from the Persian Empire, built a new fleet to challenge Athens on the seas. Yet, even in this darkest hour, Athens refused to surrender. They showed incredible resilience. They melted down temple treasures to build a new fleet, tapped into their emergency reserves, and somehow they fought on. The war dragged on for another 9 years, a desperate struggle for survival, but the Sicilian disaster had inflicted a mortal wound. Finally, in 404 BC, after a final naval defeat at Aegospotami, a starving and blockaded Athens surrendered to Sparta. The terms were harsh. Their empire was dissolved, their fleet was surrendered, and in a moment of ultimate humiliation, their famous long walls, the very symbol of their power and security, were torn down to the sound of celebratory music. The fall of Athens was not just a military defeat, it was a lesson for the ages. It showed how even the most brilliant civilization can crumble from within, brought down by arrogance, overreach, and political division. The Sicilian Expedition stands as a timeless and tragic warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the profound human cost of war. The story reminds us that history is not just about grand battles and empire, but about the choices people make and the consequences that echo for centuries. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into history compelling, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for more stories that shaped our world. See you next time.